This is Fundraising Growth Now, the podcast for arts and cultural organizations wanting to build stronger donor relationships and raise more money. It's part of the RSC coaching program and is hosted by founder and CEO Bob Swaney. For the latest insights and information, join our mailing list at rscfundraising.com.
So it's been a long, hot summer, and I mostly took a break from podcasts to focus on our clients and, enjoy a bit of venturing back out in the world, like hopefully you did too. The podcast is returning with a slightly different format. Rather than strictly providing thoughts on RSC's best practices, I think the current environment warrants a little more flexibility, a little more creativity, and maybe some adaptability. And so the qualities that most listeners here are applying with, I would say, great frequency right now, and qualities that my team and I are adapting to also. And so I'm going to do at least the next few podcasts here in a little less formal, a little less scripted way, and just kind of give you some thoughts on different topics. Today, I'm going to talk about what I think one of the most significant risks right now could be to fundraising success, and that is patron confusion. And most arts organizations, I think, are moving forward with new seasons and openings and welcoming the public back and so forth. But it's probably fair to say, too, that we all expected to be on the road that was a little less bumpy right now than it actually is. Arts administrators and performers, visual or otherwise, are really dealing with a myriad of issues, I think, which change even more rapidly than they did a year ago. And having to adapt, and we talked a year ago about the word pivot. And now we're pivoting, it seems, every week in some markets and every day in some others. But the arts administrators are the ones living it. And so I really do understand. And your audience and attendee issues are real. You have artist issues that can be real, the partnership issues, staff issues, venue issues, mostly having to do all with safety and compliance. And I guess the way I look at it is it's all important, but it changes so rapidly, and some of the issues overlap and conflict that it really can and does cause confusion, both internally within the staff and board and artists, and externally with the patron base and funders, grantors, audience members, attendees, and so forth. So, routinely, arts organizations develop some sort of, uniform strategies for their internal and external constituents. And then they communicate those strategies both internally and externally with some level of proper frequency and reinforcement and consistency. This communication process does a lot of good things. It sets expectations, it breeds familiarity, an entire host of other benefits that help patrons feel informed and engaged and involved. And in turn, the familiarity is designed to increase patronage, what we always affectionately call going and giving, and that level of being involved and informed and educated and engaged helps increase patronage. And I think that's a pretty simple concept that most organizations would agree with. But what most organizations have been and currently are experiencing now is just the opposite. And of course, it's not their fault, but they have to deal with it nonetheless. So we're all in a rapidly changing environment, one where arts organizations cannot set their own expectations or make promises in traditional ways or keep promises in a traditional way. And the ability on how, where, and when to perform or where to provide or where to present can change, with a quick spike in healthcare cases. And we've seen some of that recently. I'm sure many markets, folks right now who are listening to this have experienced that firsthand. The safety conditions and the safety requirements change as well, and as well they should, but they do have to change, and you do have to adapt to those. I could go on, but I think since most of you are going through some level of this, I probably don't need to unpack it any further. You probably get it, you're probably living it, and you have your own stories related to it. But it's even more difficult, I think, than initially that idea that last year it was a universal condition that affected everyone. And so how to deal with it, there was an entire universe of people to help on how to deal with it and what the approach would be and what the communications would be. But now there's so many different variables and so many different markets that what works in one place doesn't work in another, and what might work today may not work tomorrow. And so it's really everyone finding their own way. And to me, that's more complicated in a lot of ways. It's like taking a shower that runs hot and cold without warning. It's very surprising when the temperature changes, and it's likely not very satisfying. And every once in a while, you probably gasp or shriek due to the change in temperature. So this constant change, while necessary in today's world, I think rather brings a whole host of issues. I'm going to focus on a couple just for the sake of time, but really it'll look at internal and external. But first, I think the outward message is changing so quickly and frequently that patrons are becoming confused, or at least can become confused. What they thought they knew yesterday about attending doesn't apply today, or the rules changed, or the offerings changed, or conditions to attend changed again for the 11th time. It becomes confusing, and many patrons give up trying to keep up. And while they are eager to return to the theater or museum or hall or performing arts center or whatever, the barrier of ever-changing rules, I believe, is starting to take its toll. And this idea of trying to keep up with all the changes is becoming really difficult on an external basis. Secondarily, the internal confusion is also starting to take its toll, probably has been for a while. But the managements and boards and artists of these organizations are also doing their very best. And I think they're doing, by and large, doing an outstanding job trying to keep up with the changes and adapt to those and even communicate them. But the time and attention needed to address a constantly evolving environment is starting to splinter, I suppose, the attention and sort of the reorganizing of critical, urgent priorities on any given day. Again, even more than it was a year ago. I mean, we sort of created a playbook in real time last year collectively that everyone could follow. And I think this year, it's kind of up to you to create your own playbook, depending on where you are and what the rules are and what they might look like moving forward. So I often joke about how much more money an arts organization could raise if they just weren't distracted by having to produce art. I've said it for 20 years, and while it's funny, last year we actually saw it come true. Now, I'm not advocating you do less art so you can raise more money, because that's not the point, but it was really incredible. Most organizations raised a lot of money last year, in part because they could be almost single-minded about it. And there's certainly other things that came into play, but that was one of the reasons that leaders could focus on raising money. And it was incredible, but we saw that occur. But now, I suppose, and thankfully, in all seriousness, the presentation and access of art is starting to, come back online. People want it. And now some communities have to think about curbing it again or marginalizing it again temporarily in some way. And it's frustrating. And I know you're frustrated. As a firm, my team and I certainly feel that frustration from our clients of constantly having to renegotiate the pathway. It's frustrating for everybody, but worse, it's deflating, and those changes are confusing. So I kind of come back to this both internally and externally, but looking at our patron base particularly. And what I've found is that, both internally and externally, when confusion increases, productivity decreases. And so for the staff and the board and so forth, the more confused they are, you're risking being a productive, highly efficient organization. And externally, if your patrons are confused, the likelihood that they'll continue to buy and give begins to diminish if they're very confused and they don't know what to do and they don't know what their role is and they don't know what you're doing and so forth. I mean, it can become very confusing. And there are byproducts that go along with that, and they're not often good byproducts. But what do you do about it? And I wish I had the answer. I don't have the perfect answer, and I don't think anybody else has the perfect answer either. I think you have to find your answer. But what I can do is give you some thoughts, and this is based on our experiences with our clients, throughout the country, and sort of our observation about how different markets look differently as well. First of all, I think communicating what you know and having your organization focus on the things that don't change will be pretty important. We talked about this during the pandemic, but I think carrying into all this change right now, looking at the constants will be extremely helpful. So how do you do that, though, when everything's changing? And I think at least part of the answer is you stay mission-focused with your message and not activity-focused. Activities are going to change a lot. Mission, hopefully, won't change a lot. So I think promising that you'll stay in contact, promising that you will stick with your mission, and with those actions, you can encourage patrons and partners to stick with you and to continue to participate in whatever ways are possible. So if you think consistency in message for fundraising, and you think about being mission-based rather than activity-based in your messaging, you can start to develop consistencies in how you reach out and lessen the confusion just a bit. Remember, it's not, as you're coming back online as an institution, it's not just about what you can and can't do. I suppose it's more about who you are and what you are committed to in your community, because those are the kinds of messages that won't change they won't swing as dramatically from one side to the other. Continuing to ask for philanthropic support is the second one. I think it's tough right now. We're finding it working with organizations that it's tough right now because administrators and board members have to split their time. And we get that dealing with all the other variables, trying to bring the art back online, trying to make it accessible, trying to get it funded. Those are, but working the ops part of it, working the artistic part of it, those are real issues and you have to deal with them. And particularly when they're changing all the time. But don't kick the can down the road when it comes to asking. Asking and giving are two of the constants, again, right now that you can count on. So don't sideline it. If you sideline it, then you can't count on them. You can trim the confusion through messaging, and you can utilize your strongest messaging as you have donor outreach. And that doesn't just mean when you're asking for support, but it certainly includes when you're asking for support. The next one I suppose would be make time for cultivation, asking, and stewardship. So while I say keep asking, it's not just about the asking when I say that. It's really about the whole cycle, cultivating, asking, and stewarding your donors. Again, I know it's hard because there are only so many hours of the day. You have certain priorities. Those priorities are changing, which takes more of your time. But this needs your attention, obviously, as well. So thinking about 2 or 3 different things that you can do over and over and over again with cultivation, asking, and stewardship so that you don't have to rewrite that book every time you want to fundraise. So think about the consistency as part of that book that you're writing so that it doesn't get squeezed out by other priorities. Just don't let it happen. And I know it's much easier said than done, but successful organizations are the ones who are continuing to fundraise despite all the other changes going on right now. Next, I would say engage with your donors and your other patrons. And this goes way beyond telling and selling and all that kind of. This is about true engagement and having your board truly engaged to reach out, share information, ask questions. Keep your patrons close, and keep them informed and keep them involved. We talked about, I mentioned that earlier, but that idea of keeping them informed and engaged is really important to ask if you're going to expect them to continue to give when you ask. Well, so I've gotten this far, I think, without saying the word COVID or Corona or Rona or the virus, but we kind of have to talk about it. You might be in an infectious hotspot right now or not. Maybe you will be tomorrow or not. Maybe you've peaked on that and you're already on the downward roll, which is great. And maybe the concessions that you make for your patrons and artists will keep changing as that condition keeps changing. But what's not going to change is everyone's need for consistent bedrock information and communication. So think about, even beyond what I said earlier, think about how you can continue to be very consistent with that messaging. But keep it simple. Find 3 or 4 things that you can talk about over and over and over again, or you at least use as your communication filters. I'll start to wrap up by saying this. I'm in my 3rd decade of arts fundraising, and I've picked up a few truisms along the way, and I'll share some of them now just because they're fun, I hope, and hopefully applicable. But the first one is people continue to want to be generous. And I believe that. I think no matter what the conditions are, if people want to find ways to be generous, that your consumers, your artists, your organization, your sponsors, your partners, everyone, and you as an organization want to continue to be generous as much as you possibly can. The key right now is to not let rapidly changing environments change your mind about that. The next one is that when people are included, they're more generous, and I've touched on that without saying it directly, so I'll say it directly now. When people are included, they tend to be more generous. So that communication structure, the simplicity of it, the frequency of it, those are important things. Next would be that patrons will show you a lot of grace as long as they know what's going on. Everyone's made mistakes in the last 20 some odd months since we've had to deal with this issue, this pandemic issue, and the shutdown and the rebuild and the quasi next shutdown and the variable that goes back and forth. But organizations that communicate transparently and honestly and frequently are the ones that I see. The patrons are just softer. They're just a little more forgiving of mistakes or inconveniences or things that you have less control over. So again, it kind of goes back to how we treat them and what we say and so forth. Next, of course, because I'm a fundraising person, is err on the side of asking. The waiting for this perfect moment when everything's going to be okay and we can ask for support, I just don't believe in it. I would say err on the side of asking unless you have a really good reason to not make the ask. The worst that's going to happen is that very likely someone's going to say, not right now, and then you get to negotiate when you go back and speak with them again. Last on this list, I suppose, is that you almost always have to ask to get. So it kind of goes back to the one I just said, err on the side of asking, but waiting for your donors to do the right thing because they should know how tough times are because we're communicating with them, it isn't really a good prescription for success, at least not in my book. So this idea of you have to intentionally, deliberately, thoughtfully ask for support on a very frequent basis. So in other words, all these kind of wrapped up together, keep it simple, keep it engaging, keep asking, keep thanking, keep stewarding. And again, don't make them complicated, but be persistent about those things, persistent with yourself about doing those things, persistent as an organization about doing those things. If there's one takeaway, and I like to always end these podcasts with a takeaway, but if there's just one thing you heard today, I hope it's this. I hope that you don't let other critical and urgent issues keep you from asking for philanthropic support today.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Fundraising Growth Now. To find previous episodes, to join RSC's mailing list, or to find more information about our client services and success stories, please visit rscfundraising.com.